It's 4:30 a.m. in London. The kitchen is already warm from the coal stove, but you've been awake for an hour. As the youngest maid in the house, you're expected to have breakfast ready before anyone else stirs. The darkness outside the tall, narrow basement window is absolute, painted in shades of deep indigo and soot. London slumbers beneath a dense blanket of river fog, but inside the basement realm of this grand 4-story townhouse, your long workday has already begun in earnest. The stillness of the early morning carries a distinct weight. You move quietly across the flagstone floor, mindful of the soft leather soles of your work boots against the cold stone, taking care not to let a single utensil clatter. Every sound in the sleeping house amplifies, echoing up through the back staircase that winds like a wooden spine from the servants' quarters below to the family bedrooms above. Your hands, already red and raw from the harsh carbolic soap used in yesterday's washing, work by the soft yellow flicker of a single brass oil lamp. Before you can begin preparing the morning meal, the range, the massive cast iron heart of the kitchen, demands immediate attention. Raking out the grey ashes from the night before requires a delicate touch. You lower the iron grate slowly, catching the dusty clinkers in a deep metal pan, careful not to kick up a cloud of ash that might settle on the clean linen tea towels stacked neatly nearby. The draft must be adjusted just right. You feed thin slivers of dry pine kindling onto the surviving embers, watching the tiny orange sparks catch and dance before carefully building up the fire with heavy blocks of dark, dense black coal brought up from the cellar. As the fire gains strength, a comforting warmth begins to radiate from the thick iron hearth, pushing back the lingering chill of the damp subterranean room. You fill the heavy copper kettle with cold water drawn from the brass pump at the scullery sink. The pump handle is icy to the touch, requiring firm, rhythmic strokes to draw the water up from the cistern below. Setting the kettle directly onto the hot iron plate of the stove, you know it will take nearly 20 minutes to reach a rolling boil, giving you precious little time to organize the rest of the morning tasks. Next comes the careful assembly of the morning trays. There is a precise hierarchy to everything in this house, down to the exact placement of silver teaspoons and linen napkins. For the master and mistress of the house, the finest bone china cup and saucer are wiped clean with a dry cloth to ensure not a single grain of dust remains. A small silver pot for cream, a porcelain bowl filled with white lump sugar, and a freshly polished silver strainer must be arranged with absolute symmetry on a polished mahogany tray. For the young ladies, delicate porcelain painted with tiny cornflowers is selected, accompanied by small pots of black currant preserve and thin slices of toast, crusts meticulously trimmed away. The air in the kitchen slowly fills with the comforting aromas of the morning routine, the bitter, earthy scent of roasting coffee beans being ground in the small wooden hand mill, the rich aroma of boiling oats stirring in a heavy iron pot, and the dry, sweet scent of warm bread. You stand at the long, scrubbed wooden prep table, slicing bread with a long, serrated knife. Each slice must be uniform, neither too thick nor too flimsy, ready to be toasted over the open coals using a long 3-pronged iron fork. Beyond the kitchen door, the rest of the basement area begins to wake in total silence. The scullery, where the heavy washing of pots and pans will take place later, remains dark and damp for now, its stone sink glistening in the faint light filtering through from the corridor. The housekeeper's sitting room is locked, its key residing safely in the pocket of Mrs. Hughes's black silk apron. Up above, past the green baize door that separates the servants' quarters from the family's elegant living spaces, the grand townhouse is entirely dormant. The heavy velvet curtains in the drawing room are still tightly drawn, keeping the morning damp at bay, and the dust sheets over the formal furniture sit motionless like ghostly silhouettes in the gloom. You pause for a brief moment while waiting for the water to boil, leaning slightly against the wooden work table to rest your aching calves. The life of a maid is measured in constant motion and relentless physical repetition. Yet in these quiet, shadowy hours, before the bellboard begins its relentless ringing, there is a serene order to the world. Everything has its proper place. Every task follows a rhythm established generations ago, and the quiet kitchen feels almost protective, isolated from the vast, chaotic city waking up beyond the brick walls. The kettle begins to sing, a low, gentle whistle that slowly rises in pitch, breaking the stillness. You step forward to move it to the side of the stove, reducing the heat before carefully pouring the boiling water into the silver teapot to warm the metal. Outside, the very first pale light of dawn begins to streak the grey sky, visible through the high iron bars of the basement window, signaling that the rest of the household will soon begin to stir. The brass bellboard, mounted high on the kitchen wall, sits motionless for now, its row of spring-loaded bells connected to wires that stretch throughout the entire house. Each bell is labeled in neat calligraphy: master's bedroom, drawing room, morning room, nursery. In less than half an hour, those bells will begin their energetic jangling, summoning you and the rest of the household staff to their duties across 4 floors of stairs. But for this brief, fleeting pocket of time, the kitchen belongs entirely to you, bathed in the gentle warmth of the roaring stove and the soft, ambient glow of the lamp. The soft, steady glow of the oil lamp begins to lose its solitary hold on the kitchen as the clock on the mantel strikes 5. A faint, slate-grey illumination filters down through the iron grate above the basement window, painting cold square patches across the flagstones. The quiet stillness that enveloped the house an hour ago begins to shift. Upstairs, through the thick floorboards and plaster, the first subtle signs of life stir in the upper servants' rooms. Soft steps echo down the back stairs, and soon Sarah, the housemaid, joins you in the kitchen, her eyes heavy with sleep, tying the crisp white strings of her apron behind her back in a silent, practiced motion. There is little time for conversation in these early hours. The unspoken rule of the house dictates efficiency above all else, and every minute lost now will compound into delayed duties later in the day. Together, you begin the essential preparation for lighting the fires throughout the upper floors, a task that must be completed before any member of the family opens their eyes to the morning air. In the corner of the scullery sit the heavy wood and wire fire baskets, lined up like soldierly ranks. Each basket must be filled precisely, dry wooden kindling stacked neatly at the bottom, small chunks of soft coal to catch the flame quickly, and larger blocks of hard anthracite coal that will burn steadily through the morning hours. You gather the black lead, a greasy paste kept in a small clay pot, along with a stiff bristled brush and a soft woolen rag. Black leading the grates is a dirty, physically demanding job, but the ironwork in the principal rooms must shine with a dark, metallic luster, entirely free from ash, dust, or rust. Balancing 2 filled fire baskets, one in each hand, You begin the long climb up the narrow, uncarpeted wooden stairs. The contrast between the warm, working atmosphere of the basement and the chilled air of the stairwell is sharp. The air up here smells faintly of lavender wax, old paper, and the lingering dampness of the London atmosphere that creeps through every chimney and window frame. Your first destination is the master's study on the ground floor. Stepping carefully over the threshold, you enter a room suspended in yesterday's shadow. The heavy dark velvet curtains are closed tight, sealing out the pale morning light, and the cold air inside holds the dry scent of tobacco smoke and leather bindings. Moving with practiced quietness, you kneel on the thick brass hearth rug, setting your tools down on a protective canvas sheet spread to catch any loose soot. The cold grate is choked with the grey remnants of last night's fire. Using a small brass shovel, you scoop out the dead ash, placing it gently into the metal ash bucket so as not to kick up a fine grey dust that could settle on the mahogany desk or the velvet upholstery. Once the grate is clear, you apply a small dab of black lead to the iron rim, buffing it vigorously with the stiff brush until the dull metal transforms into a deep, gleaming black. The rhythmic scraping of the brush against the iron is the only sound breaking the heavy silence of the room. With the hearth prepared, you arrange the dry kindling in a delicate criss-cross structure, ensuring enough space between the sticks for air to draw through. A twisted piece of old newspaper goes beneath, followed by a light layer of coal. Striking a lucifer match against the rough side of the box, you hold the small flame to the paper. It catches instantly, the blue flame turning bright yellow as it licks up through the wood. Within moments, the sweet, resinous smell of burning pine fills the cold room, followed by the deep, rich crackle of coal taking heat. Moving quickly now, you stand up, smooth down your apron, and gather your baskets to continue down the carpeted hallway. The drawing room, the morning room, and the master bedroom must all be lit in swift succession. Each room presents its own delicate ecosystem. A chimney that draws poorly can quickly fill an elegant room with suffocating grey smoke, requiring you to carefully adjust the brass damper while remaining as quiet as a shadow. By 6 o'clock, the main living quarters are beginning to warm, the newly lit fires casting soft, flickering orange light across silent oil paintings, heavy gilt frames, and polished rosewood tables. Up on the second floor, outside the bedroom doors, you deposit the copper cans of hot washing water, wrapped tightly in thick wool towels to retain their heat. You knock softly 3 light, polite taps before stepping back into the corridor to await the next phase of the morning. The first bell of the day rings from below, a sharp, clear brass tone that echoes up through the central hall. The household is officially awake. From this moment on, your pace quickens, transforming from the slow, deliberate care of the dark hours into a continuous, synchronized dance of service that will carry you through to the late hours of the night. With the fires kindled and the hot water cans left outside the bedchambers, the quiet grace period of the morning comes to an abrupt end. The house awakens around you like a heavy, intricate machine coming slowly to life. Down below, doors begin to open and close. Footsteps hasten across the basement flagstones, and the faint chime of china being set out echoes up the service stairs. Up here on the residential floors, your presence must become entirely invisible just as the family begins to stir. You carry your heavy brass polish, soft rags, and a series of stiff brushes down the wide carpeted staircase to the main parlor and drawing room. The heavy velvet curtains which have kept out the chill of the London night, must now be drawn back to admit the pale, watery morning light. You pull the thick cords with smooth, steady motions, allowing the grey sunshine to spill across the deep crimson carpets and gilded furniture. Outside, the street is slowly coming alive. The distant clatter of iron-shod horse hooves against damp cobblestones and the muffled calls of early street vendors signal that the city is awake. Before the family enters the parlor for their morning prayers and breakfast, every surface must be rendered pristine. You drop to your knees with a soft dusting brush, meticulously sweeping away any stray flecks of ash that may have drifted onto the hearth rug during the lighting of the fire. The high-gloss mahogany and rosewood tables demand constant vigilance. Using a tiny dab of beeswax mixed with turpentine, you rub the wood in tight, circular motions until the grain glows with a deep warmth, taking care not to leave a single fingerprint on the polished surfaces. The delicate porcelain ornaments on the mantelpiece, tiny shepherdesses, ornate brass clocks, and painted glass vases must be dusted with an exceptionally light touch. A single slip or broken piece could mean the immediate loss of a week's wages, or worse, a dismissal without a reference. You wipe each piece individually with a soft feather duster, checking to make sure the clock on the mantel matches the precise time of the grand longcase clock in the main hall. As 7 o'clock approaches, the scent of sizzling bacon, fried bread, and fresh coffee drifts up from the basement kitchen, signaling that breakfast is nearly ready to be served. You gather your dirty rags, polish cans and brushes into your wooden caddy, slipping out of the parlor just as the first rustle of silk petticoats and the firm tread of the master of the house sound from the upper landing. You press yourself quietly against the wall of the service corridor, head bowed slightly, waiting in perfect stillness as the family descends into the dining room. Once the hall is clear, you hurry down the back stairs to take your own brief morning meal in the servants' hall. The basement is now a hive of silent, efficient activity. The butler stands by the sideboard, reviewing the day's mail. The cook moves authoritatively between the stove and the prep table, and the upper housemaids move quickly with armfuls of fresh bed linens. You sit at the long pine table in the servants' hall alongside the scullery maid and the footman. Breakfast for the lower staff is simple and quick. Thick slices of coarse bread, spread with cold dripping, accompanied by strong, dark tea, sweetened with condensed milk from a large tin mug. There is little time for idle chatting. 10 minutes is all that can be spared before the morning's heavy cleaning regime begins in full force. You sip the hot tea gratefully, feeling its warmth spread through your tired muscles, preparing yourself for the hours of sweeping, scrubbing, and carrying that lie ahead. The quiet rhythm of the breakfast hour downstairs provides a small window of opportunity to return to the upper floors. While the family gathers in the dining room beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers, you ascend the rear stairs once again, carrying a heavy wooden bucket filled with warm water, sodden rags, and a stiff scrubbing brush. The upper halls, lined with thick woolen runners and heavy wallpaper, require constant maintenance to keep the creeping London soot at bay. You start on the top landing outside the master bedrooms. The runner must be swept first using a small hand broom and a dustpan. You work on your knees, brushing with short, firm strokes to lift the fine grey grit brought in on the hems of long skirts and heavy boots. Every step down the stairs must be swept individually, gathering the debris into small piles before lifting it carefully away so no dust floats into the air to settle on the freshly polished wainscoting. Once the runner is swept, You turn your attention to the uncarpeted wooden borders of the floorboards. The wood is cleaned using cold water and a minimal amount of soap, as too much moisture will cause the timber to warp over time. You wring out the cloth until it is barely damp, wiping along the grain of the wood with long, practiced sweeps. Your lower back aches from the awkward angle, but there is no time to pause. The bedrooms must be cleared, aired out, and reset before the lady of the house ascends to check the morning's progress. Stepping into the master bedroom, once it has been vacated, you immediately open the heavy timber sash windows an inch or two, despite the damp air outside. Victorian hygiene dictates that bedroom air must be thoroughly refreshed every morning to banish harmful miasma. The room is heavy with the scent of night candles, lavender washwater, and soft wool. First comes the bed, a massive four-poster brass and mahogany frame supporting heavy horsehair mattresses and feather beds. Making a Victorian bed is a rigorous two-person task, but working alone requires double the effort. You strip back the heavy coverlets, blankets, and linen sheets, piling them neatly over a nearby chair to air. The feather mattress must be vigorously beaten and turned to restore its shape and softness. You use both hands to punch, lift, and roll the heavy mattress, smoothing out the lumps until it sits even and plump against the wooden frame. Next, the linens are pulled taut. First, the undersheet, tucked tightly at the corners with sharp, flat hospital folds, followed by the upper sheet and thick woolen blankets. The heavy bolster and linen-covered pillows are plumped vigorously and smoothed down with the flat of your hand. Not a single wrinkle is permitted on the final white linen counterpane, which must drape symmetrically on both sides of the bed, touching just above the carpet line. Around the room, the night's remnants must be cleared. The washstand, topped with marble, holds the large ceramic pitcher and basin used for the morning wash. You pour out the soapy, lukewarm water into your slop pail, taking care not to let a single drop splash onto the wallpaper or carpet. The basin is wiped clean with a dry cloth until the porcelain shines, and the pitcher is refilled with fresh, cool water from the hall cistern. The most delicate and unpleasant task of the morning involves the earthenware chamber pots stored in the nightstands. You handle them with absolute discretion, covering each pot with its ceramic lid and a thick flannel cloth before carrying them down the back stairs to the house's drainage closet. It is work that demands speed, care, and total stoicism. By 9 o'clock, the bedroom has been fully transformed. The fire has been stoked back to a gentle flame. The bed is immaculately made, the washstand is replenished, and the air smells clean and crisp. You take a brief step back to survey the room, ensuring every brush, bottle, and trinket on the dressing table sits in its exact, designated position before closing the door softly behind you. By mid-morning, the focus shifts to the relentless demands of the laundry, a physical trial that consumes vast amounts of energy, water, and time. Down in the subterranean scullery, adjacent to the main kitchen, the air is thick, warm, and heavy with moisture. Steam hangs like a translucent curtain in the cold subterranean light, condensing into tiny droplets along the lime-washed brick walls and dripping steadily from the wooden rafters above. The scullery maid is already hard at work, but the volume of household linen requires extra hands. Great copper boilers built directly into the brickwork rumble softly over roaring coal fires, bubbling with soapy, scalding water. You tie a heavy, waterproof canvas apron over your cotton one, tucking the long skirts up slightly to keep them clear of the sloshing water on the wet flagstone floor. The sorting process is rigorous. Delicate laces, embroidered handkerchiefs, and silk undergarments are separated from the heavy white cotton bedsheets, linen tablecloths, and coarse kitchen towels. Washing Victorian garments requires an intricate knowledge of fabrics and harsh chemical agents. Stains must be treated individually before the fabrics ever touch the main wash. Lemon juice and salt for iron rust, cold milk for ink spots, and stiff pastes of fulling earth to lift grease from heavy woolens. For the heavy cottons and linens, the work is brutally physical. Using a heavy wooden dolly, a three-legged wooden pole with a cross handle, you plunge into the deep copper tubs, turning and churning the soaked fabrics through the boiling, sudsy water. The smell of harsh carbolic soap, lye, and hot steam fills the small room, burning the back of your throat. Your arms ache from the continuous rhythmic lifting and twisting, the hot water splashing against your forearms and turning your skin a vivid, tender red. Once washed, the linens must be lifted out using long wooden tongs and transferred to the rinsing tubs filled with cold water. A small wooden tub containing washing glue, a synthetic ultramarine dye wrapped in a small cloth bag, is swirled into the final rinse water. This subtle blue tint counteracts the natural yellowing of white cotton and linen, giving the finished laundry that brilliant, stark whiteness expected by the mistress of the house. After rinsing, the heavy, waterlogged fabrics must be wrung out. You work alongside the scullery maid at the large iron mangle fixed to the wall, feeding the heavy sheets between two massive, spring-loaded wooden rollers. One of you cranks the heavy iron wheel, while the other guides the wet cloth through. Water pours out in sheets, splashing into the drainage trough beneath the rollers, leaving the fabric squeezed flat, damp, and surprisingly heavy. Because London's air is thick with coal smoke and soot, drying laundry outdoors is often impossible without turning pristine whites a dull, speckled grey. Instead, the heavy damp sheets must be lugged up to the drying room or hung on wooden clothes horses suspended from high iron pulleys near the kitchen ceiling. The heat from the cooking stove slowly bakes the moisture out of the cloth, creating a damp, humid atmosphere that fills the entire basement level for hours on end. Your hands are raw, pruned, and throbbing by the time the last sheet is fed through the mangle. Yet there is no time to rest or stretch your aching shoulders. The morning is slipping away quickly, and the parlor fires must be checked, the lunch trays prepared, and the front steps scrubbed before the afternoon callers arrive. By 10:30, the heavy steam of the laundry room gives way to a brisk, chilly assignment. The front of the house must be rendered immaculate for the public eye. While the interior of the townhouse is a private sanctuary, the grand white stone steps, brass door fittings, and wrought iron railings outside represent the family's social standing to every passerby in the fashionable London square. You trade your wet canvas apron for a clean cotton one, checking your hair in the small, cracked mirror by the scullery door to ensure not a single stray lock has escaped your cap. Outside, the London morning is cool and damp. A light mist clings to the gas lamps along the pavement, and the air smells strongly of sea coal smoke, wet horses, and damp stone. Kneeling on a thick woven straw mat placed on the cold stone steps, you begin the painstaking work of scrubbing the white hearthstone steps. This is done using a heavy block of soft white pipe clay or yellow stone, water, and a coarse coconut fiber brush. Working from the top step down toward the street, you scrub in tight, circular motions, working out the grime, mud, and soot ground into the porous stone by visitors and deliverymen. Once the dirt is lifted, You apply a fresh layer of the wet white clay, smoothing it evenly across the surface with a damp cloth. As it dries, it leaves behind a brilliant, powdery white finish that looks immaculate until the next pair of boots ascends the stairs. Next comes the brasswork. The front door features a massive brass knocker, a heavy keyhole cover, and a grand door handle, all dulled by the sulphurous urban air. You apply a dab of paste made from rotten stone and oil, using a soft woolen rag to work the dark polish into every groove and crest of the metalwork. The smell of the polish is sharp and metallic. With a clean piece of dry flannel, you buff the brass vigorously until it gleams like burnished gold, capturing sharp reflections of the foggy street behind you. While working on the steps, you must remain acutely aware of social etiquette. If a gentleman or lady walks past on the pavement, you lower your eyes and pause your work, remaining quietly motionless until they have passed. If a caller arrives for the family during this time, you must step aside instantly, keeping your hands tucked neatly beneath your apron. Before heading back inside, you take a stiff broom to the cast-iron foot scrapers set near the entrance, clearing away dried mud, and sweep the immediate area of the pavement clean of litter and fallen leaves. The cold wind bites through your thin cotton sleeves, making your damp hands ache. But the crisp, immaculate appearance of the entrance is a point of absolute pride for the household. Gathering your bucket, brushes, and rags, you descend the steep iron stairs into the area wall, the open-air light well that leads to the basement entrance. Returning to the warmth of the lower hallway, you slip off your working boots to swap them for quiet indoor shoes, ready to assist the cook with the final preparations for the midday meal. The atmosphere in the basement kitchen shifts into high gear as 12 o'clock approaches. The midday meal, luncheon for the family and dinner for the servants, demands absolute coordination. The stove is roaring, its iron-hot plates glowing a dull red, filling the room with the intense heat of roasting meats, simmering broths, and baking pastries. Your role during this hour is one of swift, quiet support. While the cook monitors the main dishes, you stand at the long preparation table, assembling the lighter courses for the family's luncheon. Thin slices of cold roast beef must be arranged in overlapping fans on silver platters, garnished delicately with sprigs of fresh watercress. Pickled cucumbers, clear jellies, and warm, crusty rolls are set out on delicate porcelain dishes. Every plate must be visually flawless. A misplaced garnish or a stray drop of sauce on the rim of a dish requires immediate correction. Once the food is prepared, the heavy mahogany service trays are loaded. Carrying a tray laden with heavy porcelain, polished silverware, and weighted glass covers up 2 flights of narrow stairs, requires immense physical balance and steady nerves. You ascend with quiet, deliberate steps, ensuring the tray remains perfectly level so no gravies or soups spill onto the pristine linen tray cloths. At the top of the stairs, you hand the trays over to the butler or senior parlor maid, who will carry them into the formal dining room. Unless specifically required to assist with serving the meal, lower maids must retreat to the shadows of the service hallway, standing by to receive returned dishes, replenish hot water pitchers, or bring up additional courses as signaled by the call bells. While the family dines above, the lower staff takes their main meal of the day downstairs in the servants' hall. The butler presides over the head of the table, with the housekeeper at the other end, maintaining strict decorum and table manners. The food for the staff is hearty but simple: boiled mutton, potatoes, root vegetables, and plain pudding, accompanied by small beer or water. Conversation during the meal is quiet and restrained, focused mainly on the afternoon's upcoming tasks and household organization. gossip or complaints about the family are strictly forbidden. The meal is swift, lasting no more than 20 minutes, as the dining room dishes will soon begin returning to the basement, kicking off the massive cleanup effort that dominates the early afternoon. The return of the luncheon trays signals the start of one of the day's most labor-intensive tasks, clearing the dining room and tackling the mountain of dirty china, silver, and glassware stacked high in the scullery. High above, the family has retired to the drawing room for their afternoon rest, leaving the dining room littered with heavy mahogany chairs pulled out from the table, crumpled linen napkins, and stray crumbs scattered across the Persian rug. You begin by restoring order to the dining room. Armed with a silver-plated crumb scoop and a small tray, you work your way around the massive dining table, carefully scraping the linen tablecloth clean of any stray bread crusts or flakes of pastry. The heavy velvet curtains are adjusted slightly to block the harsh midday light, and any used crystal wine glasses are gathered onto a felt-lined tray to prevent them from clinking or scratching against one another. Back in the subterranean scullery, the temperature has risen dramatically. Steam swirls toward the small, high window as two large wooden tubs are filled with piping hot water. Washing the family's expensive tableware requires a strict, methodical order to prevent damage and preserve the fine finishes. First comes the glassware. Crystal stems and cut glass water goblets are washed separately in a wooden tub lined with soft towels to cushion the delicate glass. You use hot water mixed with a splash of vinegar, never heavy soaps, which leave a dulling film, and wipe each piece clean with a soft linen rag. Once washed, the glasses are immediately dried with a lint-free tea towel and buffed until the lead crystal sparkles without a single streak or water spot. Next is the flatware. Silver knives, forks, and spoons are washed in warm, soapy water, carefully keeping silver-plated items separate from pure sterling to prevent scratching. Any silver that shows the slight yellow or brown tarnish caused by sulfur in the air or food, especially from egg yolks, must be set aside for polishing later with a soft paste of powdered whiting and spirits of wine. Finally, the porcelain china is washed. Because antique hand-painted china can be easily damaged by boiling water or harsh scrubbing, each plate, bowl, and saucer is washed individually with warm water and mild soap flakes. You handle each piece with extreme caution, knowing that a chipped dish from an expensive matching dinner service could result in the cost being deducted directly from your monthly wages. As the scullery maid rinses the dishes in cold water to set the glaze, you dry each piece thoroughly and arrange them in their designated positions on the wooden display dressers and felt-lined storage chests. By 2 o'clock, the scullery is restored to perfect order. The flagstone floor is swept clean of stray water, and the drying cloths are hung near the warm stove to dry before the evening preparation begins. As the clock strikes 2, the rhythm of the house shifts into the quiet, controlled atmosphere of the afternoon. This is the time set aside for detailed maintenance of the upper living quarters, particularly the ladies' dressing room and wardrobe, a sanctuary of fine silks, woolens, laces, and delicate scents. You carry your sewing basket, soft bristle clothes brushes, and a bottle of benzene up the rear staircase. The air in the ladies' dressing room is warm and smells softly of rose water, lavender, and sweet almond oil. The morning's discarded garments lie across the velvet chaise lounge, waiting to be inspected, cleaned, and carefully put away. Every item of clothing worn by the mistress requires meticulous care. Victorian dresses, built with intricate layers of heavy silk, velvet, lining, and whalebone boning, cannot simply be washed in water. Instead, you hang each heavy gown from a wooden frame and go over the fabric inch by inch with a soft bristled clothes brush, lifting away the light layer of street soot and dust that gathers along the deep folds and trailing hems. Stains are treated with extreme precision. A drop of oil or grease on a silk skirt is lightly dabbed with benzene or covered in powdered French chalk to draw out the moisture without damaging the dye. The delicate white lace collars and cuffs which are basted onto the dresses by hand are unstitched using a small pair of sharp scissors. These will be washed separately in a small bowl of soapy warm water, gently squeezed through a towel and pinned out on a padded board to dry flat before being sewn back onto the dress for the evening meal. Once the day dresses are cleaned and brushed, they are hung inside the tall cedar armoires. Small sachets filled with dried lavender and sweet woodruff are placed between the layers of fabric to deter moths and keep the garments smelling fresh. Shoes and boots are wiped clean, their leather conditioned with a light cream and stuffed with acid-free tissue paper to preserve their shape. In addition to clothing maintenance, the dressing table requires careful attention. The silver-backed hairbrushes, vanity hand mirrors, and crystal perfume bottles are wiped free of dust and fingerprints. The tortoise-shell combs are cleaned using a fine thread passed between the teeth to remove any trapped hair or dust. Before leaving the room, you check the washstand once more, ensuring fresh lavender water is set out. Clean linen towels are neatly folded over the mahogany rail, and the fire in the small bedroom hearth is stoked to a gentle, steady burn. Everything must be prepared so that when the mistress returns to dress for evening dinner, her private room is an oasis of comfort, order, and warmth. By 4 o'clock, the lower front entrance of the house experiences a steady stream of activity as the formal visiting hours begin. Afternoon tea is the centerpiece of social life in the Victorian home, a carefully choreographed ritual of hospitality, status, and refined conversation. Upstairs in the drawing room, the atmosphere must be utterly serene, masked from the heavy physical labor required to sustain it behind the scenes. You assemble the elaborate afternoon tea service in the butler's pantry. The finest silver tea service, comprising the kettle on its spirit lamp stand, teapot, cream jug, and sugar basin, is polished to a mirror finish. Delicate bone china cups, thin as eggshells and hand-painted with gold leaf, are arranged on a heavy silver tray draped with a cut-work linen cloth. Alongside the tea, plates of tiny, impeccably prepared refreshments must be arranged. Cucumber sandwiches, sliced so thinly they are almost translucent, buttered scones wrapped in hot napkins to keep them warm, and small almond cakes. Every piece is designed to be eaten effortlessly without damaging white kid gloves. When the front doorbell chimes, a crisp double ring, the butler answers the main entrance while you remain in the shadows of the hallway landing, ready to take coats, hats, and wet umbrellas. As callers are escorted into the drawing room, you step in quickly and silently after the door closes to make sure the fire is burning brightly without throwing off excess smoke or heat. During tea service, your presence is swift and near silent. You move across the thick carpets like a ghost, carrying fresh pots of boiling water to dilute the strong black tea, discreetly clearing away empty plates and replacing used napkins. You must remain entirely unbothered by the conversation around you, keeping your eyes lowered while staying alert to the slightest nod or gesture from the mistress, indicating that more hot water or clean cups are needed. Downstairs, as the used tea trays begin to trickle back down to the scullery, the pace increases once more. The delicate silver kettle must be wiped dry, the tea leaves emptied into the compost bucket, and the fragile china washed gently by hand before the evening dinner routine takes over. Outside, the grey afternoon light begins to fade into the dim orange gloom of the London twilight. The street lamps are lit one by one, their faint yellow glow reflecting off the damp pavements, signaling that the daytime visits are drawing to a close and the extensive preparations for the family's evening dinner must now begin. As the faint grey daylight completely dissolves into the heavy London twilight, a shifting mood settles over the townhouse. The transition from day to evening brings a unique set of demands, transformed entirely by the necessity of light. Long before electric switches could flood a home with instant brightness, illuminating a grand four-story residence was a laborious art that dictated the rhythm of every dusk. You begin by descending to the lamp room, a small stone-walled chamber located beside the pantry. Here, dozens of brass, pewter, and silver oil lamps sit in neat rows along wooden shelves. Each lamp requires daily maintenance to burn brightly without filling the upper rooms with black, greasy soot. Working with steady hands, you trim the burnt edges of the woven cotton wicks using sharp, curved scissors. A wick cut unevenly will flicker and smoke, blackening the fragile glass chimneys above. Next comes the careful filling of the lamp reservoirs with clean paraffin oil. Using a small copper funnel, you pour the clear liquid into each lamp, taking care not to spill a single drop onto the polished metal bases. The glass chimneys, frosted or clear, must be buffed until they are entirely free of smudges, fingerprints, or lingering carbon stains. A soft flannel cloth and a drop of spirits bring the glass to a crystal shine. With a wooden tray loaded with prepared lamps, you begin the journey back up through the darkening house. Starting on the ground floor, you move from the front entrance hall to the dining room, drawing room, and study. Moving silently from corner to corner, you strike long wooden matches, holding the flame to the freshly trimmed wicks until they catch with a soft, warm glow. You carefully lower the glass chimneys into place, adjusting the brass knurled wheels to set the flame at just the right height, bright enough to push back the encroaching shadows, but low enough to prevent smoking. Simultaneously, the heavy evening curtains must be drawn shut throughout the main floors. Pulling the thick velvet and damask drapes across the high timber windows seals out the raw evening dampness and the gloomy, gas-lit fog of the London streets outside. The atmosphere inside transforms instantly into a warm, gold-hued sanctuary of light, soft shadows, and crackling fires. Upstairs in the bedrooms, small night lamps are placed on nightstands, their flames turned low to provide just enough light for the family when they ascend later to dress for dinner. Every mirror in the house catches and multiplies the warm flicker of the oil flames, illuminating polished mahogany furniture and heavy gilt frames in a rich amber light. By 5:30, the entire house glows with an inviting, quiet warmth. The lamps are set, the curtains are pulled tight against the night, and your attention must turn immediately to the next major phase of the evening, preparing the formal dining room for the grand multi-course dinner. With the lamps lit and the heavy curtains drawn tight against the damp London night, the focus shifts entirely to the central event of the household's evening, the grand dinner. Laying a Victorian dining table is an exacting science of absolute symmetry, where every plate, glass, and utensil serves as a silent testament to the family's social standing. You assist the butler in preparing the heavy mahogany dining table, which has been extended to its full length with extra leaves. First comes the silence cloth, a thick layer of green baize felt spread across the polished wood to cushion the heavy tableware and deaden the sound of plates being served. Over this, the main tablecloth is draped with extreme care. Made of immaculate white damask linen, it must hang perfectly even on all four sides, its sharp central crease aligned precisely with the center of the room. The centerpiece is positioned first, usually a massive silver epergne holding fresh flowers or fruit, flanked by heavy silver candlesticks fitted with white beeswax candles. From this center point, every place setting or cover is measured out using a small wooden rule. Nothing is placed by eye. An error of half an inch will ruin the overall harmony of the table. Each cover is built upon a large polished silver service plate. To the right of the plate, working from the outside in according to the order of courses, sit the soup spoon, fish knife, and meat knife, their blades facing inward toward the plate. To the left lie the corresponding silver forks. Above each setting, an array of fine lead crystal glasses is arranged in a delicate diagonal line. A small glass for sherry with the soup, a wide bowl for white wine with the fish course, a heavy goblet for red claret with the roast, and a tall champagne flute for the dessert. Small silver salt cellars, cut glass pepper shakers, and tiny porcelain dishes containing sweet butter are placed at regular intervals down the length of the table. Crisp linen napkins, starched so stiffly they crackle when folded, are shaped into intricate designs, usually the bishop's mitre or a folded water lily, and set precisely in the center of each service plate. Once the main table is fully dressed, you step back into the shadowy corners of the room, while the butler inspects the line of each row of silver and glass. Every piece must catch the soft, flickering light of the candles and oil lamps, casting long, sparkling reflections across the pristine white linen. By 6 o'clock, the dining room stands ready, frozen in a state of quiet perfection. Downstairs, the kitchen is entering its most chaotic and intense hour of the day, as the cook prepares to turn raw ingredients into an elaborate 8-course meal that must be delivered to this very table without a single second of delay. Down in the basement kitchen, 6 o'clock brings an atmosphere of intense concentration and sweltering heat. The tranquility of the afternoon is entirely replaced by the sharp sizzle of roasting meats, the rhythmic thud of heavy cleavers on wooden chopping blocks, and the sharp hiss of boiling copper pans. The cook stands at the center of this culinary storm, commanding the kitchen with absolute authority, while you and the scullery maid move with frantic, quiet precision to support her every move. The sheer volume of food required for an 8-course Victorian dinner is staggering. Massive roasts of beef, legs of mutton, and stuffed game birds turn slowly on iron spits before the open grate of the stove, dripping fat into metal trays below. Great pots of thick turtle soup, delicate consommé, and simmering vegetable purees bubble on the hot iron plates. The heat in the room rises rapidly, making the air thick with the rich aromas of roasting herbs, rendered fat, wine sauces, and sweet pastries. Your job during this feverish hour is continuous preparation and maintenance. You peel piles of root vegetables, strain hot stocks through fine muslin cloths, and chop herbs into tiny, uniform flecks. Every pot or pan that the cook finishes using is instantly whisked away to the scullery so the workspace remains clear. There is no room for error. A single burnt sauce or a delayed platter disrupts the complex timing of the entire evening. Plating the courses demands an artistic eye under immense time pressure. The first course, soup, must be ladled into heavy silver tureens that have been pre-warmed with hot water so the soup does not lose its heat during the climb up the service stairs. Garnishments of toasted croutons or fresh parsley are applied with steady fingers, despite the sweat dampening the hair along your forehead. As each platter is completed, it is covered with a polished silver dome to retain its heat and scent. You lift the heavy, scalding trays and carry them to the base of the service stairs, handing them off to the footmen who stand waiting in their formal liveries. The ascent must be continuous and smooth. As soon as one course goes up, preparations for the next, the fish course, followed by the entrees, begin immediately on the prep table. Your uniform catches the heat of the range, and your back aches from the constant bending and lifting, but the momentum of the kitchen carries you forward. In this subterranean engine room, individual weariness is forgotten. Every movement is dedicated to ensuring that far above, in the quiet, cool air of the dining room, the family and their guests experience an effortless sequence of culinary perfection. The atmosphere upstairs in the dining room stands in stark contrast to the intense heat and noise of the basement kitchen. Here the air is cool, scented lightly with beeswax, silver polish, and fresh flowers. The heavy velvet curtains mute any sound from the street, and the warm, golden light from the silver candelabras flickers softly against the wallpaper. The family and their evening guests are seated around the long damask-covered table, their quiet conversation punctuated by the subtle clink of crystal and silver, while the butler and head footman handle the direct presentation of dishes at the table. Your role during the meal is one of silent, background support in the adjacent serving pantry. You stand just beyond the heavy dining room door, monitoring the warming plates on the brass side heater, unsealing fresh bottles of wine, and receiving the silver platters as they emerge from the dining room after each course. The rhythm of an 8-course Victorian dinner is precise and unhurried for the diners, but relentless behind the scenes. First comes the clear soup, served in deep porcelain bowls. As soon as the last spoon is set down, the butler signals, and the bowls are quietly whisked away to your pantry station. You instantly hand off the warm plates for the next course, poached turbot with a rich hollandaise sauce carried in on a heavy silver platter. Each return dish must be cleared with absolute discretion. Leftover food is carefully scraped into covered metal buckets to be sorted later. Usable cuts of meat and broths saved for the lower servants' meals or charitable distribution, while scraps are set aside for disposal. Plates are stacked according to size, keeping silver cutlery strictly separate from fine porcelain to prevent scratching during the fast-paced transitions. Between courses, you step quietly into the room when needed to replenish water goblets from a heavy glass pitcher, keeping your movements so fluid and unobtrusive that the guests barely notice your presence. You keep your eyes fixed on the tablecloth, watching for any accidental spills. A drop of red wine on the pristine white damask must be immediately and silently covered with a small sprinkle of salt from a silver cellar. By the time the roast course gives way to the sweet course, an elaborate towers of jellies, spun sugar, and warm fruit tarts, the dinner has lasted nearly 2 hours. The air in the dining room grows slightly warm from the dozens of burning candles, and the pace of conversation slows. As the ladies prepare to rise and retire to the drawing room for coffee and music, leaving the gentlemen to their port and cigars, you clear the final dessert plates from the table. The heavy lifting of the meal is over, but the massive task of restoring the dining room and washing the mountain of evening dishes is only just beginning. With the gentlemen finally vacating the dining room to join the ladies in the drawing room, the immense task of restoring order to the lower floor begins. The dining room table, once a pristine display of social elegance, now sits cluttered with stained linen, crumb-strewn damask, and rows of greasy glassware. You work alongside the scullery maid to strip the table, handling each heavy piece of plate and delicate crystal with extreme caution, despite the fatigue setting into your muscles. Down in the scullery, the mountain of evening dishes requires an organized multi-step assembly line. The fine porcelain dinner plates must be washed in hot, soapy water, rinsed and dried, before being packed away in their padded wooden crates. The most tedious task of the late evening, however, falls upon the silver. Every fork, spoon, platter, and gravy boat used during the 8-course meal must be thoroughly inspected for tarnish or food marks before it can be locked away in the butler's safe. You sit at the small wooden workbench in the pantry with a pot of jeweler's rouge, a soft chamois leather cloth, and a stiff horsehair brush for the intricate filigree work. Applying a small dab of the red polishing paste, you rub the metal in tight, firm circles, working out the dark patches caused by the sulfur in the evening's egg and meat dishes. Your fingertips turn a deep metallic black as you work, but you persist until every piece reflects the warm light of the oil lamp like liquid mirror. Once polished, the silver is counted 3 times against the butler's master inventory list. A single missing spoon triggers a frantic search of the entire basement level, as any unaccounted for silver is treated as a severe security breach. Only when every piece is verified, dried, and safely laid in its green felt slot does the butler turn the heavy iron key in the plate closet lock, marking the end of the evening's formal dining service. While the family enjoys their final hour of conversation and music in the drawing room, you ascend the quiet back stairs to perform the night turn-down service in the bedrooms. The upper floors are cool and still, bathed in the soft, flickering light of the hallway gas lamps. Entering each bedroom, you work quickly and methodically to prepare the dark, quiet space for sleep. You approach the heavy 4-poster bed, peeling back the top counterpane and folding the crisp white sheets into a crisp, neat triangle on one side, a silent invitation for the room's occupant to slip beneath the covers. The heavy wool blankets are adjusted to ensure warmth against the creeping night chill. Next, you draw the heavy velvet window curtains completely shut, blocking out the cold drafts and the dismal glow of the street lamps below. The fire in the bedroom hearth must be prepared for the night. You rake out the dying embers from the afternoon, laying down a fresh bed of dense anthracite coal that will burn slowly and throw off a steady, gentle heat until morning without requiring attention. On the hearth rug, you set a long brass copper bed warmer filled with hot coals from the kitchen stove, sliding it between the heavy cotton sheets to take the icy chill off the bed before the mistress arrives. Finally, the washstand is set for the late-night ablutions. The morning's cold water is emptied into your slop bucket, replaced with heavy copper cans of steaming hot water wrapped in thick, dry flannel towels to retain their heat. Fresh linen hand towels are draped over the mahogany rail, and a small night candle is placed on the bedside table with a brass matchbox beside it. Stepping back out into the quiet corridor, you leave the bedroom in total readiness, warm, softly lit, and entirely secluded from the cold, foggy city outside, waiting for the gentle rustle of skirts that signals the family is finally coming upstairs to rest. Around 10 o'clock, the soft rustle of silk skirts on the main staircase signals that the family has retired to their private quarters. You stand ready in the shadow of the upper corridor, stepping forward silently the moment the mistress reaches her bedroom door. The late evening requires a delicate balance of speed, gentleness, and absolute discretion as you assist with her nighttime unrosseting. The elaborate layers of Victorian evening wear are impossible to shed unassisted. You stand behind the mistress, carefully unfastening the dozens of tiny cloth-covered buttons running down the back of her bodice before unlacing the stiff whalebone corset. As the tight laces loosen, she takes a long, relieved breath, and you ease the heavy silk gown off her shoulders, taking care that the delicate fabric does not brush against the floor or catch on any jewelry. The heavy dress is immediately hung on a padded frame to air out, while the starched petticoats, crinoline, and fine undergarments are neatly folded into the wicker laundry hampers. Once the mistress is wrapped in a soft, warm flannel dressing gown, you tend to her hair, unpinning the complex evening updo. You remove the decorative tortoiseshell combs and jeweled hairpins, placing them in their designated velvet boxes on the vanity table. With a stiff boar bristle brush, you stroke through her long hair in smooth, rhythmic motions, 100 counts from root to tip, lifting away the light layer of soot and coal smoke that lingers in the air of even the cleanest grand homes. After pouring warm water from the flannel-wrapped copper pitcher into the porcelain basin, you hand her a soft linen washcloth and stand by with a clean towel. Every movement is quiet, soothing, and entirely unhurried, creating a peaceful sanctuary for her to wind down from the social demands of the day. With the nightgown smoothed down and a final check of the room's temperature, you assist her into the warm bed, pulling up the heavy wool blankets. You quietly adjust the brass damper on the hearth fire to ensure it burns slowly throughout the night, extinguish the main oil lamps, and leave a single night candle flickering softly on the bedside table before slipping out of the room, closing the heavy oak door with barely a sound. While the upper floors drop into quiet sleep, the main living spaces on the ground floor require one final, painstaking sweep before the townhouse can be locked down against the damp London night. The transition from active entertainment space to darkened, silent showroom is immediate. You step through the double doors into the drawing room and adjacent parlor, carrying a single heavy brass oil lamp that casts a long, flickering circle of yellow light across the thick Wilton carpet. The air in these formal reception rooms is thick with the lingering scents of the evening, the dry perfume of lavender water, the faint metallic tang of gas lamps, rich tobacco smoke drifting from the adjoining smoking room, and the dying warmth of cooling fireplace coals. The elegance of the earlier gathering has dissolved into a quiet, scattered mess that must be erased completely before the morning sun hits the window panes. Your work begins with the clearing of the small, delicate surfaces scattered throughout the room. Moving soundlessly in your soft-soled working shoes, you navigate around the heavy rosewood side tables, low velvet ottomans, and silk-upholstered armchairs, gathering the evening's remnants onto a dark mahogany tray. Delicate porcelain coffee cups, their bottoms coated with a fine sludge of sweetened grounds, sit beside tiny crystal liqueur glasses, holding sticky amber drops of brandy or cherry bounce. You lift each piece with steady, practiced hands, listening for any telltale clink that might echo up the open stairwell toward the sleeping chambers above. Discarded sheet music, loose pages of piano arrangements, and Italian vocal duets lies fan spread across the top of the dark grand piano. You gather the sheets, smoothing the creased corners, and stack them in neat chronological order inside the Canterbury music rack beside the bench. Next comes the careful tending of the room's high-maintenance furnishings. The heavy velvet armchairs and silk sofas displaced during intense evening conversations are dragged back into their precise geometric alignments relative to the central hearth and the long front windows. Using a stiff palm brush, you sweep across the plush velvet seats, lifting away stray crumbs, threads, and small traces of soot, taking care to brush the pile in a single direction so the fabric catches the light evenly. Discarded newspapers, including the evening edition of the Times and folded social gazettes, are gathered from the side tables, flattened with the palm of your hand, and stacked neatly on the lower shelf of the chiffonnier for the master's morning reading. The hearth fire, which served as the visual and thermal center of the parlor throughout the evening, has now collapsed into a quiet, dying bed of dark orange embers, surrounded by a thick bed of gray ash. Restoring safety to this area is one of your most critical responsibilities of the late hour. Using a small brass shovel, you scrape the outer edges of the glowing coals back toward the center of the iron grate, ensuring no stray embers remain lodged near the carpet edge. You then pull the heavy brass fire guard, a tall, finely meshed wire screen set in a heavy brass frame, into place directly over the open fireplace, locking it securely against the hearth tiles. This barrier ensures that any rogue sparks popping from the dying coal during the deep hours of the night will be trapped safely inside the brick hearth rather than jumping onto the wool carpet or wooden floorboards. Finally, you reach up to adjust the iron draft dampers in the chimney throat, closing them just enough to reduce the cold night downdrafts without causing lingering smoke to back up into the room. Stepping out of the parlor, you pull the heavy mahogany doors shut behind you, hearing the brass latch catch with a soft, decisive click, and step into the vast, cavernous expanse of the grand entrance hallway. Here, the temperature drops noticeably. The high, plaster-molded ceiling retains the chill of the midnight air, and the black and white marble tiles feel icy even through the soles of your shoes. The butler emerges from the shadows of the dining room passage, his tall frame rigid and his posture unyielding despite the late hour. Together, in a silent, well-rehearsed ritual, you perform the final security inspection of the ground floor. You approach the massive front door, an imposing slab of solid, dark-stained oak, reinforced with heavy iron fittings, that stands between the warm interior of the home and the damp, unpredictable streets of the city outside. The butler steps forward first, lifting the heavy iron sliding bolts at the top and bottom of the frame and driving them into their stone sockets with two loud, dull thuds that reverberate down the hallway. Next, the main brass mortise lock is turned with a heavy, double-bitted iron key that hangs from his belt, its mechanism throwing a solid iron bolt deep into the door casing. Finally, you reach for the thick, polished brass safety chain, lifting its end and sliding the heavy pin along its slotted steel track until it drops into place with a sharp metallic clatter. Every window along the ground floor is inspected individually. You verify that the brass sash fasteners are turned tight and that the thick wooden internal shutters are swung shut and locked across the glass, barring out the swirling river fog, the sulphurous coal smoke, and any potential night intruders. With the doors locked and the windows sealed, the house enters a state of complete lockdown. The longcase clock, standing in the corner of the hallway, ticks with a slow, heavy rhythm, its long brass pendulum swinging in a hypnotic, metallic arc that echoes off the bare plaster walls. Its dark hands point to 20 minutes past 11. The grand gasolier hanging overhead has already been turned down to a tiny blue pilot light, casting long, dramatic shadows through the high archways. Satisfied that every living space is safe, clean, and secure, the butler gives you a brief, formal nod of dismissal before turning off his hand lamp. You stand alone in the shadowy hallway for a brief moment, holding your small brass candle, surrounded by 4 stories of absolute silence, before turning toward the dark back door that leads down into the subterranean quiet of the basement level. Descending the narrow stone stairs back into the basement, you return to the quiet chill of the scullery for the final, exhaustive scrub down of the day. The subterranean rooms have lost the frantic energy of the dinner rush. The air has cooled, though the lingering scents of roasted meats, boiled greens, and paraffin oil still hang heavy in the damp corners. Sunlight and gaslight alike have faded from the upper floors, but down here, illuminated by a single dying oil lamp, the work of resetting the workspace for tomorrow morning must be completed down to the last square inch of stone. You pull off your white dress apron, laying it carefully aside, and tie the stiff, damp canvas work apron around your waist once more. The scullery sink, a massive trough of carved grey slate, is filled with the evening's final load of greasy iron saucepans, copper stockpots, and heavy cast-iron trivets. These coarse cooking vessels cannot be washed with the delicate care given to fine porcelain china. They demand hard physical labor, hot water, and harsh abrasive cleansers. Using a handful of coarse sand mixed with soft soap and a bundle of stiff straw bristles, you tackle the blackened bottoms of the copper pans. The fire from the coal range leaves a stubborn, tarry layer of soot on the metal that must be scrubbed away until the warm orange shine of the copper emerges once again. Your arms move in steady, forceful circles, the muscles in your shoulders burning with deep fatigue. The cold water drawn from the pump chilled your hands earlier, but now the scalding water from the stove copper turns your fingers raw and bright red. Each pan, once thoroughly scrubbed and rinsed, is wiped dry with a coarse Hessian rag to prevent rust from forming overnight on the exposed iron rims. They are placed in order on the high wooden shelves, their polished fronts catching the faint yellow flame of the lamp. Next come the heavy oak chopping boards, which must be scraped clean with a short iron blade to remove any stray meat fibers or moisture, then scrubbed down with salt and cold water to bleach the wood clean and prevent souring. Finally, you turn your attention to the flagstone floor itself. Mud from deliverymen's boots, stray drops of grease, and coal dust have accumulated across the scullery floor over 16 hours of continuous movement. Armed with a heavy fiber brush, a bucket of grey carbolic water, and a thick knee pad made of folded burlap, you drop to your knees. You work your way from the furthest dark corner near the coal cellar back toward the kitchen doorway, scrubbing the heavy stones until they glisten wetly in the lamp flame. As you wipe away the dirty water with a heavy floor cloth, the repetitive, rhythmic motion brings a quiet, hypnotic rhythm to the late hour. The physical exhaustion is absolute, yet there is a subtle satisfaction in witnessing the chaotic, grease-stained kitchen of the dinner hour transform step by step into a pristine, quiet sanctuary, ready to receive the early spark of tomorrow's fire. With the scullery washed, dried, and reset, you carry the heavy slop bucket down the dark basement corridor to the outdoor area drainage sink. The night air outside the basement door is cold and biting, thick with the damp, sulphurous breath of the London fog rolling off the river. For a fleeting minute, you stand in the narrow, open-air brick courtyard beneath the shadow of the high iron street railings above. High overhead, beyond the brick chimneys, the night sky is a murky indigo shade, devoid of stars. The city around you has quieted down to a distant, muffled hum. The occasional far-off clatter of iron wheels on cobblestones, the soft whistling of the river damp through the railings, and the steady dripping of condensation from the grand entrance steps above. Returning indoors, you latch the heavy timber basement door, sliding the thick iron bolt into its socket. The kitchen range, which raged with orange heat just 3 hours ago, is now dying down into a quiet bed of red embers behind its iron doors. You use a long iron poker to push the burning coals together, then cover them with a layer of damp coal dust, a technique known as banking the fire. This keeps a tiny heart of heat alive, deep within the cast iron stove, through the cold night hours. ensuring that when you wake at dawn, the stove can be rekindled quickly without starting completely from cold ash. You walk through the dark kitchen, checking each pantry door to ensure they are locked securely against dampness and pests. The large wooden bread bin is fastened tight, the meat safe is latched, and the remaining butter is lowered into the cold stone well beneath the pantry floor. Every utensil, towel, and iron tool rests in its precise, designated place. Before leaving the basement level entirely, you trim the wick of the central wall lamp, turning the brass wheel down until the flame dies with a tiny blue flicker. The kitchen falls into deep darkness, illuminated only by the faint red glow leaking through the air vents of the banked stove. You pick up your personal brass candlestick, lighting its small tallow candle from the stove embers, and shield the delicate flame with your palm as you prepare to begin the long climb up the rear stairs to the attic bedrooms where the servants rest. The ascent to the attic quarters is a slow, silent journey up the narrow back staircase, far removed from the wide carpeted steps used by the family. Here, above the grand bedrooms and elegant dressing rooms, the wooden steps are bare and unpainted, creaking softly underfoot despite your efforts to walk lightly. You shield the trembling flame of your tallow candle with a cupped hand, watching your shadow stretch long and distorted across the whitewashed plaster walls. With every flight of stairs you climb, the air grows noticeably cooler. By the time you reach the top landing, a narrow, low-ceilinged corridor tucked directly beneath the timber roof rafters, the warmth of the lower floors is a distant memory. The attic level houses the female servants, away from the male staff quarters in the basement. It is a quiet, drafty place where the wind whistles softly around the exterior brick chimneys and rattles the small skylights set into the sloping roof. You step quietly into the small bedroom shared with the scullery maid, easing the latch shut to avoid waking her. She is already fast asleep, her breathing deep and even beneath a heavy mound of coarse woolen blankets. The room is tiny and sparsely furnished. 2 narrow iron cots, a single pine washstand, a small chest of drawers, and a wooden peg rail along the wall where tomorrow's working clothes hang waiting. The cold in the unheated attic room is sharp, catching in the back of your throat as you set the candlestick down on the wooden washstand. Your reflection in the small, mercury-spotted mirror shows a face pale with fatigue, eyes shadowed, and hair dusted with faint traces of flour and dried soot. The physical toll of 16 continuous hours of labor settles heavily into your joints, making every movement slow and deliberate. Your personal late-night routine is brief, dictated by the freezing room temperature and sheer physical exhaustion. You slip off your worn indoor shoes, letting your feet rest at last after hours of standing on flagstones and climbing endless flights of stairs. Your heels are sore and your ankles are stiff and swollen, but there is immense relief in simply taking the weight off your aching frame. Unpinning your white cotton servant's cap, you place it on the small chest of drawers alongside your clean apron for the morning. You pull the remaining horn hairpins from your hair, letting it fall down over your shoulders before running a wooden comb through the tangles. The static electricity crackles quietly in the cold air as you quickly braid it into a loose plait to keep it neat for the morning. Poured from a tin pitcher on the washstand, the water in the porcelain basin is icy, sending a sharp shiver through your body as you wash your face and hands. The carbolic soap leaves your skin tight, and your raw, chapped knuckles throb against the cold water. Working quickly to avoid catching a chill, you trade your dark work dress for a heavy flannel nightgown, pulling it down over your head before wrapping a hand-knit woolen shawl around your shoulders. You perform these final motions largely in the dark, blowing out the small candle flame to save the tallow from wasting away down to the socket. The room dips into deep shadow, illuminated only by the faint, pale moonlight filtering through the dusty, sloped skylight. Outside, the great city sleeps beneath its blanket of river fog, while inside, the vast townhouse around you is entirely still. Stepping toward the narrow iron cot, you draw back the thick, heavy layers of coarse wool and patchwork quilting, bracing yourself for the sharp bite of cold linen against bare skin. Without a bed warmer to take off the night's chill up here in the attic, the bed feels as icy as the flagstone floors below. Slipping beneath the covers, you pull the heavy blankets right up to your chin, curling your legs inward to trap whatever small bit of body heat you can offer against the freezing mattress. For the first few minutes, your entire frame shivers rhythmically, the cold air seeping down from the drafty rafters above and pressing through the thin horsehair padding beneath you. Slowly, as the heavy wool absorbs your warmth, the intense shaking subsides into a steady, dull ache that spreads across your overworked back, sore knees, and swollen calves. Lying in the dark, watching the pale moonlight trace slow, silent patterns across the whitewashed, sloped ceiling, your mind finally has a moment to unspool from the constant demands of the day. The endless sequence of orders, bell chimes, and physical tasks that governed every second since 5 o'clock this morning begins to blur together. You recall the sting of the cold wind while scrubbing the front steps, the sweltering heat of the range during the dinner rush, the weight of the silver trays on the steep service stairs, and the sharp, metallic smell of the rotten stone polish. In the quiet solitude of the late night, the frantic pace of the townhouse fades, leaving only the deep, bone-weary exhaustion that comes from 16 non-stop hours of domestic labor. The house around you settles with a series of quiet, familiar structural groans. High above, the timber roof beams contract against the dropping temperature of the London night, while far down below, the massive iron grates of the banked kitchen range cool into darkness. There is a strange, peaceful comfort in knowing that for the next 5 hours, no bells will ring, no doors will need answering, and no grand silver platters will need carrying up the back stairs. The immense, sprawling machine of the Victorian household has finally ground to a complete halt, leaving you wrapped in total darkness and silence, entirely free to let your guarded, watchful posture relax into the soft hollows of the feather pillow. Your thoughts drift naturally toward the break of dawn and the inevitable return of your daily routine. In just a few brief hours, before the first pale grey light of morning even touches the high glass skylight overhead, the sharp, persistent ringing of the alarm clock will shatter the silence of the attic. The unrelenting cycle will begin all over again, pulling on the stiff, cold work dress, creeping down the dark back stairs in total silence so as not to wake the sleeping family, and kneeling once more before the cold iron belly of the basement kitchen stove to rake out yesterday's ashes and kindle the day's first flame. Yet, despite the overwhelming weight of tomorrow's duties waiting just on the horizon, a quiet sense of pride settles over you in these final waking moments. Every task assigned to you throughout the long, demanding day was executed with care, precision, and absolute thoroughness. The front steps were left gleaming white for the fashionable neighborhood to see. The ladies' fine silk gowns were brushed, cleaned, and protected from soot. The grand silver dinner service sparkled flawlessly beneath the warm candlelight, and the entire 4-story home was kept safe, warm, and immaculately ordered from top to bottom. The heavy, rhythmic breathing of the scullery maid in the adjacent cot provides a soothing, familiar backdrop to the quiet darkness of the room. Outside the tiny window, the distant, muffled sound of the grand carriage horses on the main road below grows increasingly faint, melting away into the cool, swirling night mist that wraps around the sleeping city. Your eyelids grow impossibly heavy. The sharp aches in your muscles soften into a dull, comfortable numbness, and the last remaining thoughts of silver polish, hearth fires, and laundry tubs slowly drift away. Closing your eyes against the pale moonlight, you let go of the day's long burdens, sinking deep into a profound, restorative sleep before the coming dawn summons you back to the work once more. The deep, quiet expanse of midnight settles over the sleeping house, transforming the attic bedroom into a sanctuary of near absolute isolation. Far below, the grand reception rooms, the polished dining hall, and the subterranean scullery sit in complete darkness, their high ceilings and heavy mahogany furnishings shrouded in the cold, still air of the late hour. Up here, under the sloped pitch of the roof, the world narrows down to the faint, steady sound of wind filtering through the gaps in the slate tiles and the rhythmic, quiet breathing of your fellow servant. Sleep does not always arrive instantly, despite the bone-deep weariness that weighs down your limbs. Instead, your body lingers in a floating state between wakefulness and rest, where the intense physical exertion of the preceding 16 hours slowly drains out of your overstretched muscles, leaving behind a profound, heavy numbness that spreads from your shoulders down to your swollen ankles. In this quiet stretch of the night, free from the watchful eyes of the housekeeper and the relentless demands of the parlor bells, your mind wanders back through the architecture of the day. The sheer scale of physical effort required to maintain a single grand Victorian townhouse is staggering when viewed as a whole. Every polished brass doorknob, every dust-free velvet curtain fold, every sparkling lead crystal goblet, and every glowing coal fire is the direct result of continuous, deliberate manual labor. Nothing in this house maintains itself. The smooth, serene illusion of luxury and effortless comfort enjoyed by the family upstairs is entirely underwritten by an invisible, subterranean engine of human effort. From the moment your boots hit the cold flagstones before dawn until you pull the coarse woolen blankets over your shoulders at night, every action is synchronized with the precise schedule of domestic service. The physical reality of that labor leaves an unmistakable mark on the body. Lying still under the heavy quilts, you feel the sharp, throbbing ache in your palms where the stiff bristles of the scrubbing brush rubbed against your skin through hours of scouring stone and iron. Your knuckles, chapped and red from the alternating exposure to icy well water and boiling washtub steam, sting in the cool attic air. Your lower back, stiff from bending over low hearths, carrying heavy copper scuttles up endless flights of stairs, and kneeling on damp burlap pads, gradually loosens its tight knot under the warmth of the bedclothes. There is no remedy for this weariness other than the brief respite offered by these few dark hours of stillness, a temporary pause before the relentless cycle resets itself with the coming of the dawn. Through the small, dust-streaked skylight set into the sloped wall above your head, the faint indigo glow of the London night shifts almost imperceptibly as high clouds drift across the face of the moon. The city outside is never truly silent, even in the dead of night, but its voice is radically altered. The chaotic daytime din of rattling iron-rimmed carriage wheels, shouting street vendors, barking dogs, and the deafening whistle of distant steam locomotives has quieted down to a low, muffled hum. Occasional sounds still pierce the stillness, the slow, metallic clatter of a lone hansom cab returning a late patron to a nearby square, the distant, echoed shout of a night watchman making his rounds along the pavement, or the sudden, sharp cry of a startled night bird passing high above the chimney pots. These distant noises do not disrupt the tranquility of the room. Instead, they serve as a gentle reminder of the vast, bustling metropolis that stretches out for miles beyond the thick brick walls of the house, wrapped in its blanket of damp river mist and sulphurous coal fog. As the minutes tick slowly past, the intense cold of the attic room continues to build, creeping inward from the single-pane glass and the uninsulated plaster walls. The warm pocket of air created beneath your heavy layers of blankets becomes a precious, defended territory against the chill. You pull the quilt tighter around your throat, tucking your chin downward to conserve every degree of warmth your tired body generates. In this quiet, unadorned room, stripped of all the elaborate ornamentation and formal pretense of the floors below, there is a rare, unvarnished honesty. Here, away from the uniform caps, the stiffly starched aprons, and the carefully maintained posture of deference, you are simply yourself, a tired worker resting in the dark, gathering whatever strength remains to face the inevitable demands of another day. As the night deepens further toward the middle hours between midnight and dawn, the stillness within the house becomes so profound that the building itself seems to take on a quiet, slow-breathing presence of its own. Every house of this size and age possesses a complex language of structural sounds, a subtle acoustics built from the expansion and contraction of heavy timber framing, the settling of brick foundations, and the cooling of massive stone chimneys. Lying awake in the narrow cot, your ears naturally pick up these micro-movements, a sudden, soft creak from the main staircase 2 floors below as the oak risers adjust to the dropping temperature, a subtle, metallic click from the iron dampers in the drawing-room chimney, or the faint, musical vibration of a brass chandelier wire reacting to a sharp gust of wind against the front facade. To an outsider, these sounds might seem eerie or unsettling, but to a servant who knows every inch of the building intimately, they are familiar, reassuring signals of a house at rest. Your thoughts begin to shift from the physical weight of the day to the delicate, complex social hierarchy that governs life below stairs. A grand household is a tightly regulated, enclosed world with its own rigid rules, unwritten laws, and distinct caste system. At the top sits the house steward and the cook, whose authority over their respective domains is absolute and rarely questioned. Below them are the butler, the housekeeper, the upper housemaids, and the lady's maid, each occupying a precise rung on the domestic ladder. At the very bottom are the scullery maids, hall boys, and junior staff, whose lives consist of the heaviest, dirtiest, and most relentless physical chores. Navigating this internal world requires as much skill and careful observation as pleasing the master and mistress upstairs. A misjudged word to a senior cook, or a failure to show proper deference to the head butler, can make an already difficult job infinitely harder. Yet, despite the rigid boundaries and the constant pressure to perform, a deep, unspoken bond forms among those who share this subterranean existence. Sitting together at the long wooden table in the servants' hall during the brief midday dinner, sharing a pot of strong black tea in the pantry while waiting for the evening bells, or silently working side by side in the steaming heat of the scullery, creates a profound sense of shared endurance. You know the exact rhythm of your fellow workers' movements. You can tell who is descending the back stairs simply by the sound of their footfall on the wooden treads. In a world where personal privacy is practically non-existent and every hour of your life is owned by another family, these quiet moments of mutual understanding and shared labor provide a vital, stabilizing anchor. The cold in the bedroom sharpens as the hour grows late, turning the air so crisp that your breath forms tiny, barely visible wisps of vapor In the faint moonlight, you slide your hands deeper beneath the heavy wool of the blanket, curling your fingers into fists to warm your icy fingertips. Your raw, chapped skin still stings slightly from the harsh carbolic soap used during the final scullery scrub, but the sharp pain has softened into a dull, manageable ache. Tomorrow, those same hands will hold fine lead crystal, carefully fold stiffly starched damask linen, carry heavy brass coal scuttles up 4 flights of stairs, and gently brush delicate silk gowns. The striking contrast between the rough, harsh reality of your daily labor and the smooth, flawless luxury you create for others is a constant, defining feature of life in service. Outside the narrow skylight, the dark clouds part briefly, allowing a brilliant beam of silvery moonlight to cut through the darkness of the room, illuminating the dusty wooden rafters above and the simple pine washstand in the corner. The pale light catches the silver-backed hairbrush resting on the small chest of drawers and reflects softly off the surface of the water in the porcelain basin. For a few breathtaking minutes, the small, cold room is bathed in a serene, quiet beauty that stands in sharp contrast to the dreary, soot-stained reality of the city outside. You watch the silvery beam move slowly across the sloped wall, marking the steady, unstoppable passage of the night hours, until your eyes grow too heavy to stay open, and your mind slowly drifts off toward the deep, dreamless sleep you have so thoroughly earned. The night reaches its deepest, coldest nadir, that profound hour before the first pale hints of dawn, when the entire metropolis of London seems to hold its breath. In the unheated attic room, the frost begins to form intricate, feathery patterns along the single pane of the sloped skylight, insulating the glass with a thin lattice of ice. Beneath the heavy, layered mound of quilts and coarse horsehair blankets, your body heat has finally created a small, fragile pocket of genuine warmth. In this deeply relaxed state, as your physical exhaustion gives way to complete surrender, your thoughts wander beyond the immediate walls of the townhouse to the vast, unseen network of labor that keeps this great Victorian city breathing through the dark. Every grand home in the square, every imposing stone terrace, and every sprawling suburban villa relies on an army of silent workers who move through the shadows of the early morning and late night. Miles away, through the dense river fog, stokers are feeding coal into the roaring bellies of gasworks furnaces to keep the street lamps glowing. Waterworks engineers are monitoring the heavy iron mains that pump fresh water beneath the cobblestones, and country carters are already driving heavy wooden wagons loaded with fresh milk, vegetables and meat toward the central markets of Covent Garden and Smithfield. The luxury, order, and endless prosperity of the empire do not simply exist. They are actively maintained, minute by minute, by millions of tired hands working in the dark. Lying in the stillness, you feel a deep, quiet connection to this vast, invisible fraternity of labor. Your daily struggles, the swollen knees from scrubbing flagstones, the raw skin from harsh lye soaps, the heavy coal scuttles that pull at your shoulder joints, and the constant, watchful pressure of the bell system are not yours alone. They are shared by tens of thousands of young women in dark dresses and white aprons across every street in the city. There is a strange, quiet dignity in that realization. While the history books write of politicians, wealthy industrialists, and grand social galas, it is the silent, relentless devotion of the working class that keeps the entire structure from collapsing into dust and chaos. The air in the room remains bitingly cold, making the tip of your nose and the tops of your ears tingle with the frost. You shift slightly, pulling the thick woolen blanket higher over your head to form a small hood that captures your warm breath. Every small movement of your body causes the old iron cot to creak softly, its wire springs groaning under your weight, but the sound does not disturb the scullery maid in the adjacent bed. She remains fast asleep, her breathing deep, slow, and unbothered, her young face smoothed of the tension and fear that usually grips it during the high-pressure hours of the kitchen rush. For a few brief hours, sleep erases all distinctions of rank, duty, and expectation, restoring a simple, equal peace to everyone beneath the roof. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the quality of the darkness inside the attic chamber begins to change. The sharp, bright silver of the moonlight fades away, replaced by a dull, heavy charcoal tint filtering through the frosted glass of the skylight. High above the slate roof, the heavy layer of winter cloud and London coal smoke begins to catch the very first, indirect, scattered light of the sun, still hidden far below the eastern horizon. It is not yet dawn, not the hour when the city wakes to its noisy, bustling life, but it is the subtle, undeniable signal that your brief time of total rest is drawing to its inevitable conclusion. In these quiet, final 20 minutes of absolute stillness, your body begins its slow, subconscious preparation for the physical demands ahead. The deep aches in your lower back and shoulder blades have settled into a dull, familiar stiffness that will only loosen once you begin moving, lifting, and carrying again. Your raw hands, softened somewhat by the night's rest, will soon be back in the icy water of the courtyard pump and the scalding grease of the scullery sink. Yet, there is no dread in your mind, no bitter resentment against the heavy burdens of the coming day. Servitude in a grand house leaves little room for useless rebellion. Survival and self-respect are built instead on pride of craft, efficiency of movement, and an unwavering internal resilience. You listen closely to the subtle morning awakenings of the house itself. Deep in the basement, 3 floors below, the banked embers of the central kitchen range are beginning to draw air through the iron vents, sending a faint, warm column of smoke rising up the main brick chimney stack that passes directly through the wall behind your bed. You can feel the gentlest, faintest vibration in the plaster as the brickwork absorbs that tiny core of heat. Far down in the front square, the first distant sounds of the day begin to echo, the sharp, metallic clink of a night watchman's lantern being extinguished, the heavy bootsteps of a policeman walking his beat across the wet flagstones, and the hollow, rhythmic clack-clack of iron-shod hooves pulling a baker's cart through the foggy streets. You take one last, deep, slow breath of the cold attic air, holding the warmth of the heavy blankets tight against your chest for a few precious seconds longer. The long, intricate journey through 16 hours of continuous service, from the early morning firelighting to the formal dinner, from the delicate dressing room maintenance to the late-night silver polishing, is complete. The cycle of the domestic day has closed its seamless circle, leaving the great house pristine, ordered, and entirely ready to be brought to life once more. The final stillness of the night begins to break as the small tin alarm clock, resting on the pine washstand, gives a sharp, dry mechanical click, signaling its internal gears are ready to trip the hammer. You reach out a trembling arm from beneath the warm cocoon of wool blankets a fraction of a second before the brass bell can sound, pressing down hard on the iron catch to silence it. Waking the rest of the attic landing before the designated minute is the infraction that brings sharp words from the housekeeper, and after 16 hours of immaculate service, you refuse to let the day begin with a misstep. The air in the room is at its absolute coldest now, thick with the damp frost that has completely blanketed the small glass skylight overhead. Standing up out of the cot is a physical shock. The icy air strikes through your thin flannel nightgown, bringing an immediate, sharp shiver that runs from the soles of your bare feet straight up your spine. Moving with practiced, quiet speed in the dark, you pull off the nightgown and slip into your cold, stiff working undergarments. The linen is stiff against your skin, retaining the chill of the unheated room. Next comes the heavy, dark wool working dress, its thick fabric dragging over your shoulders, followed by the coarse canvas apron that will protect you during the dirtiest morning chores. Every button and tape is fastened by touch alone, your calloused fingers moving automatically through a sequence practiced hundreds of times. You reach for your heavy indoor shoes, pushing your aching feet into the cold leather. Your heels are still tender, and your ankles stiff from yesterday's relentless stair climbing. But as soon as the laces are pulled tight and tied in firm knots, your posture straightens into the familiar, alert alignment required of a housemaid in service. You turn to the small pine washstand, where the thin layer of ice that formed overnight on the surface of the porcelain water pitcher must be cracked with the flat of your knuckles. You pour a small splash of the freezing water into the basin, cupping your hands to splash your face. The shock of the icy water instantly clears the heavy fog of sleep from your mind, tightening your skin and bringing a flush of red back to your pale cheeks. You dry your face quickly with a coarse linen towel, then unbraid your hair, combing through the dark strands before twisting them back into a tight, severe bun at the nape of your neck. Every stray hair is pinned securely into place before you smooth down your white cotton maid's cap over your crown. Beside you, the scullery maid begins to stir under her heavy pile of blankets, groaning softly as the bitter cold of the room breaks her sleep. You place a gentle, firm hand on her shoulder, leaning down to whisper into the dark that it is time to rise. There is no time for lingering, no room for soft complaints. Down below, 40 rooms sit cold, dark, and silent, waiting for the fires to be kindled, the carpets to be swept, and the morning tea to be drawn. Picking up your unlit brass candlestick and a box of wooden matches, you ease open the heavy attic door, stepping out onto the bare, drafty landing to begin the long descent back down into the subterranean heart of the townhouse. Stepping onto the top flight of the back stairs, you begin the silent journey downward through the quiet house. The bare wooden treads are freezing under the thin soles of your work shoes, and the narrow stairwell is filled with the deep, heavy shadows of 5 o'clock in the morning. You hold your candle steady, its small yellow flame flickering softly against the bare plaster walls, casting your shadow long and thin behind you. Flight by flight, you descend past the closed doors of the sleeping family, past the grand drawing-room landing, and down into the cold stone corridors of the basement level. With every step downward, the air shifts from the crisp, clean draft of the upper floors to the familiar, heavy scents of the subterranean workplace. Cold iron, dry coal dust, damp slate, and the lingering scent of last night's wood smoke. Reaching the kitchen, you step onto the cold flagstones and set your candlestick on the long wooden prep table. The massive iron range sits dark and dormant in the shadows, its great iron belly retaining only the faintest trace of warmth deep within the banked coals. You set to work immediately, taking up the long iron poker and the brass ash shovel. Kneeling on the stone floor before the hearth, you rake out the grey dead ash from yesterday's fire, the dry dust rising in tiny clouds that catch in the back of your throat. You lay down fresh, dry wood shavings, topping them with small splints of pine kindling, arranged in a careful criss-cross grid to allow the air to flow freely through the grate. Striking a long wooden match against the iron stove door, you touch the small flame to the paper and shavings below. The dry wood catches instantly with a soft, eager crackle, tiny orange tongues of fire leaping upward to lick at the underside of the dark coal. You carefully add the first handfuls of small, bright anthracite coals, watching as the heat builds and the smoke begins to draw cleanly up the heavy chimney flue. As the fire takes hold, sending a warm, soft orange glow out through the open grate bars and across the dark flagstones of the kitchen, a quiet sense of accomplishment settles over you. The cold, dark house is beginning to wake, its heart rekindled by your hands once again. Within 30 minutes, the heavy copper kettles will be boiling on the range, the front entrance steps will be scrubbed white, the morning parlor fires will be roaring in their grates, and the relentless machinery of the Victorian day will spin into full motion. The endless cycle of labor continues, demanding your strength, your speed, and your complete devotion to the house and its people. But standing here in the early morning quiet, warmed by the rising heat of the range fire, with your shadow cast long across the pristine kitchen floor, you are ready. You smooth down your white canvas apron, take a deep, steadying breath of the warming air, and step forward to meet the new day.